So welcome to the afternoon session. We've got 4 different papers this afternoon, and in between them, a discussion of Lonergan text. Each paper will be 20 minutes of presentation, which I will try and start with the monetary first, and then 20 minutes for conversation. So our first presenter is Reverend Dr. Stephen Ames. So we begin. Stephen, your time starts now.
20 minutes from now, Lonergan Applied. I begin by saying how much I enjoyed reading Crowe's 1980 program, Method in Theology, and Organon For Our Time, presenting new effort to understand what Lonergan in science is all about. I wish I had the paper earlier, of course. But I trust my enjoyment and the explanation of my enjoyment will come through the talk. Crowe gives us the clues that has guided me thinking as to what the lifelong Lonergan enterprise has been about. The clue is in the Lonergan Research Centre at Regis College, where there's a card index of secondary literature on Lonergan's views on topics explored A to Z. And there is a small subdivision, Lonergan Applied, according to Crowe. What it also meant maybe the Lonergan lifelong work is oriented to, whatever else you might say about Lonergan's lifelong work, is practical.
And he has provided us with an instrument of the mind, a new organon for our time. It is an instrument to be used, not just contemplated. And I found, that's just, I'm right there for that. That's great. And then I discovered the real Lonergan of history is the Lonergan who is still to be applied, right, to the urgent tasks of the new age, right, that we are facing. Crowe invites us to think of Lonergan's work in the light of the influence of Aristotle's actual but unwittingly created organon 2,300 years ago, and the consciously conceived organon of Francis Bacon 4 centuries ago for experimental science. So, now, as soon as I saw that, read that, got that, I was elevated immediately because I had a strong sense of the large frame in which this conversation was conducted, even though it was only a few pages long, right? And I just say that by way of comment that often in conversations, in various contexts in which I've lived, because in many conversations, context, decision-making, blah, I feel myself always feeling the frame is too narrow already, right? But that wasn't the case here. I love this opening. For Crowe, Lonergan's lifelong work is that of creating a fundamental method which Crowe invites us to think of as an organon in series with the Aristotelian and the Baconian forms. And Crowe is at pains to make clear that he doesn't, as far as he recalls, Lonergan never mentions the word organon. So I understand that what Crowe is doing is providing resources from these sources, Aristotle and Bacon, to interpret Lonergan, to place him, to locate him, to say, oh, so this is how we should understand him. In series with them, that's what he's about, even though he never mentions the word. For this talk, I accept Crowe's clue, love that, clue here, yes, thank you, and assessment of Lonergan's life work, and consider the following matters. So I'm happy to have the discussion with other people, whether the Crowe's up the creek with regard to Lonergan, that's possible, right? But I'm personally not going down that road. First matter then is the current list at Regis College under the heading Lonergan Applied. I have something to say about that. The second matter is the resonance between Crowe's clue with the purpose of this biennial conference and examples of Lonergan Applied pursued by various students of Lonergan's work, and this contained there, right? So there's a resonance, I wonder, which I'd like to say something about. And then thirdly, there are what I called in the abstracting obstacles, but I've now said challenges, right? Challenges to applying Lonergan to the urgent tasks of the new age we are facing. And of course, fourthly, is so what? Right? A very godly question. So there we go. They're the four things. That's what I'm going to work on. See how we go. And by the time we get to the fourth one, I will have indicated yet again in various ways that I'm not entirely happy where this has landed. Right? There's a story there, of course, but just to let you know. The current list of Regis College under the heading Lonergan Applied. How interesting. Loved it. So I emailed Father Jonathan Bernier, the director of the Lonergan Research Centre at Regis College. And I asked him about the current version of that file. Because if that's a file there, what's been added? Where's it up to? Etc., etc., etc. Jonathan replied, "Thanks for the email. I think I know the card index to which Father Crowe is referring. If so, it is still in the archives, but as far as I know, has never been digitised," right? Which I paraphrase as, "No finger has been laid upon it." Right. I'll ask, he says, I'll ask my research assistant to take a look and see what we can find. There you go, fair enough. Fred Crowe explains that an instrument like the wheel or the alphabet is known through the history of its subsequent use, not the history leading up to its creation. So however much Lonergan is rightly esteemed for his life work, whatever else his life work may be, his thought is ultimately oriented to the practical. It is programmatic for the future. That is, he has provided us with an instrument that is to be used, not just contemplated, and the real Lonergan of history is not so much the Lonergan studied and analysed, discussed and debated, located and evaluated, but the Lonergan who's still to be applied to the urgent tasks of the new age. I know I've already said that, but I repeat myself happily. Crowe presents Lonergan as providing a new organon for our times, meaning a new instrument of the mind, not an instrument of the hand, but a formation of the incarnate spirit, a way of structuring our conscious activities that has been of immense value for the ongoing work of the human race. And Crowe is presenting Lonergan in the light of his study of Lonergan, of course, as anyone must do if they intend to say what Lonergan's life work has been about. But now I'm quoting, for Crowe, especially though, through the examples of Aristotle and the organon he unwittingly created. I'm sorry about the repetitions, even though I love the way these are said. Then Bacon and the consciously conceived notion of an organon. And thirdly, Lonergan's life work of creating a fundamental method. And fourthly, that method conceived as an organon in series with Aristotelian and Baconian forms. So, now I should add, I'm not sure if I say this somewhere else, but I heard nothing back from Jonathan Bernier. Busy life, man, director of the centre, etc., etc. I don't say this with any tongue in my cheek. This is, I understand these things. I could break your heart with stories about so similar matters on my side where things have... So, however, I got nothing back. So I sent him an email a few days ago saying, look, so where were we up to with the research assistant? And do you have anything to say about where this Lonergan Applied is, playing out? So I haven't heard anything back yet. But I will keep in touch with him because I'm quite interested in this. And it maybe the game has moved on since 1980. Sure enough, it has in so many other ways. I was a little disappointed not to get something back, but life is busy for us all. So that's my first thing about the current list at Regis College, the clue, right? Which is still for me a persuasive clue, right? That's good. The fact that it also appears to be in a little bit of a backwater, a little file in a So, now I mustn't rave. Please help me here. I mustn't get into that. So the possible resonance. What?
Minutes to go.
How many?
10.
Oh, ridiculous. Okay, all right. The possible resonance. I think there's indeed a resonance. Recall, I'll just go to this. The purpose of the workshop is to strengthen and develop our grasp of Lonergan's work. Fair enough. Done that today as well. To strengthen and develop our grasp of how Lonergan's work is being deployed in our own and others' contexts, and dispose ourselves to be used by God to draw on Lonergan's work for good. That's our purpose. That's why we're here, right? So I think the second one, to strengthen and develop our grasp of how Lonergan's work is being deployed, can be paraphrased in terms of Lonergan Applied. So, and so on that basis, and because I think the so what question is quite, of course, the questions for deliberation, right? I've paraphrased as so what. Okay? And now here's what I discover, quite an interesting, to say the least, set of responses from a quick email, and I discover that so many people can answer the question. So how are you applying Lonergan? And what an extraordinary range of things it is that we're trying to apply, to which we're trying to apply Lonergan. Of course, many of them are to do with education, and so that's good, right? So, no, I haven't had time to digest these, so I'm not making any further comment on them, except to say how pleased I am, to salute you all and to encourage you to go further. And perhaps we might return to this at the so what level. And now, challenges to applying Lonergan. Okay, one challenge may be found on page 16 of Crowe's paper, where he confesses to the psychological difficulties amounting to an impossibility which students of Lonergan experience in taking a stand on current theological questions. This is Crowe, not me. Crowe says of himself, to take a minor instance, I find myself almost at a loss when people ask me for my theological views on the current questions, the status of women in the church, the magisterium, the meaning of religious life, original sin, ministry, infallibility, and the rest. Right? So if all theologians were so infected, that's his word, or informed, I add, by Lonergan's work, there would be a great silence. Instead, there is uproar among the theologians, so they are not so infected by Lonergan. Can't hear that uproar ordinarily any day of my week. I'm not deafened by the uproar, but on the other hand, I'm encouraged by the fact that in his paper, Crowe speaks as an amateur about Lonergan. That's how he described himself, right? And that we can still learn a great deal. I quote him. Here would show, can't even read my own writing here. We should draw on confidence for our amateur efforts, if that's what they are, for our amateur efforts to apply Lonergan to our contexts. On the other hand, the awesome weight of the deliberations of theologians conduces them to silence on these Lonerganian theologians, conduces them to silence. So I'm glad he reinvented himself as an amateur, so we actually get to see it. So if we were following Lonergan, would we be rendered silent? How do we avoid Crowe's silence? Is this worthy amateur efforts? I think at least that, right? But I found it quite a shock when I realised his silence. Next thing. Another challenge is Crowe's question on page 2 as to whether the now theologians are also theologians of the future. Right? Is their work, now quote him, destined to mainly tide us over the present difficulties to provide some sort of light in present darkness? Or will it endure a beacon for the generations or maybe centuries, the long term, like another Organon, like Aristotle, like Bacon? It is Lonergan's Organon that provides the instrument for the mind that will provide such a beacon. Crowe's distinction between now and then is no ordinary distinction like that between the fifth round of the AFL, and the coming grand final on the last Saturday of September. Crowe avails himself of Jasper saying, and here's an interesting thing, for more than 100 years it has been gradually realised that the history of scores of centuries is drawing to a close. Of Lonergan, Crowe says, Lonergan may have never read Jasper's phrase, but he has worked most of his life as if his purpose had been guided by that thought, as if a great new era were opening before us, as if we were going through a transition unparalleled, not just in centuries. And the task is that we should rebuild from the ground up to restructure the whole edifice completely of theology, of Catholic theology. It is in this context that Crowe offers his clue to the significance of Lonergan's work that is ultimately oriented to the practical, as I've said before, no need to repeat that. And we're dealing with the practical being the applying Lonergan to the urgent tasks of the new age. Now, another problem I have is, I wanted to follow up Jasper's thing, right? I got in touch with 5 libraries. The State Library of Victoria, don't have it. The University of Melbourne Library, don't have it. The University of Divinity Libraries, don't have it. Special reference to the Dalton McCaughey Library, don't have it. With my friends at Catholic Theological College, of course wanted to check that out, but don't have it. My friends at the United Faculty of Theology don't have it. So I'm not sure, where is this document? Where is this book? What? I haven't read it. I lament that I wasn't able to read it before this. So I have questions about this enormous change that's coming, already started. I don't know what it is. I don't know when I'm looking at urgent matters to do with that future, as distinct from, for example, all these matters. 2 minutes, thank you. I'm on to so what? 3, I'm with it, brother. Okay. That was a distraction. I now went to so what, right? So, first thing is to recognise that in the light of this, you can say that a good many of us, perhaps all of us in fact, are well on the way to Lonergan Applied. Right? That's good. And so thank you to all who applied to the invitation. A comment on the document I produced. I've set them out just as I've received it, although Matthew kindly pointed out that I've also extracted someone else's paragraph and put it in with his. So I'll alert you to that. Okay, second thing is, I can't read it? Oh yes. This is at the stage of show and tell. That's all we're doing here. What do we make of it? Wait and see. I feel overwhelmed by the so what question in response to both the paper and this here, this. Right? I clearly need to digest more, appropriate more fully what we have been doing and plan to be doing. The key form of the question is related to the third clause of the question, so what, is related to the third clause of our purpose statement. That is, disposing ourselves to be used by God to bring Lonergan into the wider world for the world's good. I believe, so my so what question is in the form, for me, I'm now taking that third clause and taking hold of it for myself, and my habit would be to ask, where is God leading us in all of this? Right? That's what I want to know. And I will need to sit with that question to let the answers start to come to the fore. But I believe one answer is to spread the working knowledge of Lonergan as it shows up in people's actually working with Lonergan, using Lonergan, living Lonergan's thing, right? Without taking note of the cautions that John often refers us to. I just want to say, this is what came to me anyway, here we go. So I was reminded just at this point, in less than 3 minutes, I assure you, St. Peter heard that, answered the question about who Jesus was, and Jesus said to him, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, Simon Bar-Jonah, but my Father who is in heaven. Right? And now we can see how the corruption of Peter's transcendental subject had gone on quite a pace. Because the next thing he says, God forbid, Lord, that you should say that, right? Notwithstanding revelation from the Father. So I take care of how... So here's what I say. We are living in a bubble of our own making, but living in it as if it is reality, right? Sustained by attracting huge resources of all kinds to build up the life we have, as in Austin, right? In which we live and move and have our being. In contrast to God calling us to love kindness and do justice and walk humbly with God, it is to other possibilities for living to which we attend more closely. And as we act on this preference, our actions and what they produce gain a life of their own, an encompassing fiction, as Frank Brennan would call it, more living us than lived by us. It is a dynamic idol which suppresses almost any sense of God. It is a dynamic idol that takes over and makes over the world, and within it covers over, distracts from, contradicts, while still drawing on the transcendental structure of human beings. It is an ambiguous bubble which we inherit and pass on to the next generation, unless we are careful, of course. It's being able to be careful, thanks to Lonergan, and the critical philosophy which we heard about from John, that I think the Lonergan Applied is all about. So.
Thank you, Stephen.